Well, here we are, just days away from the federal election, which is shaping up to be one of the closest races ever. Who will win? What will be the deciding issues? Today, we are joined by Dr. Geoffrey Hale, political science professor at the University of Lethbridge. Welcome, Dr. Hale. So great to have you back on again.
Good to be with you.
First of all, Dr. Hale, what are the latest polling results? Who would win today if the polls are accurate?
Well, the polls are all over the place, but they seem to have converged a little bit, at least at the national level. Regionally, which are the numbers that really matter, there's still a fair bit of diversity, but the consensus is that the Liberals are in a position to win a minority government unless there is a significant swing at the last minute. An additional complication is that about 6.4 million votes have already been cast, either at the advance polls or by mail. So uh, about 25% of the vote is already in. And so, while this will have a different effect in different parts of the country, uh, it would have to be a pretty significant swing in the last week for that trend to change.
Okay, interesting. Now, former Justice Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould's new book called Indian in the Cabinet Speaking Truth to Power has now been released. The book is critical of the Prime Minister and how he handled the SNC Lavalin affair. Does this have the potential to swing votes away from the Liberals?
I doubt that anybody who reads it will A, find anything hugely new in it, and B, if they have been willing to swallow a whole series of ethical challenges from the current government, if they haven't decided to switch by now, they're not likely to.
Okay. Now, is Maxime Bernier and the PPC getting a bit of a revenge in this election? Some say with their polling numbers on the rise, they could split the vote in close ridings enough to give the Liberals a win. Your thoughts?
Well, there are 25 or 30 ridings that are reportedly very close. And well, you can't transpose People's Party votes completely onto one party. Uh, Many of them do come from traditional conservatives, so that could have an impact. The last election, I calculated that the Party probably diverted about 7 ridings by being substantially more than the margin of victory by the Liberals over the Conservatives. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's more this time.
Okay, so do you think that the PPC has any chance of winning any seats at all?
Hard to say, but it's a long shot at best.
Okay, so what about the bloc? Bloc leader Blanchette has basically said that he thinks a conservative minority would be the best news for Quebec. Could this actually result in more Tory seats?
I don't know that that was Mr. Blanchet saying that. I think it was more Quebec Premier Francois Legault. But the Bloc has has gotten a gift from the English language leaders debate, the questions over Bill 21 and 96 on minority religious rights and Quebec's language laws. And so the Bloc could pull 5 or 6 more seats out of suburban Montreal than it might have otherwise as a result of this controversy. Uh, the uh, Mr. Legault's um, shout out, I suppose you could call it, for the Conservatives as well as the Bloc will probably cement at least 11 Conservative seats in Quebec. There's 2 or 3 other ridings that are close in terms of Quebec Bloc uh, competition or Conservative Bloc competition. And I suspect we will be waiting for the mail ballots to come in over the period of a few days after the election to
Hmm.
see what the outcome will be.
Yeah. So, what do you see as the key issues that voters will base their decisions on?
Uh, the the data that we see so far suggests that different groups of voters will vote on different issues. For the Conservatives, overwhelmingly, it is a dislike of Mr. Trudeau and his approach to government, broadly speaking, and that includes a wide range of issues, not least for Alberta purposes, the carbon tax. For those who are really strongly against the carbon tax and also skeptical of vaccines, that is driving support. That latter issue is driving support to the People's Party. For the Liberals, climate change and childcare are their two big draws, if you will, along with promoting fears of what Conservatives might or might not do in office, which, given the fact that a Conservative minority government is almost statistically impossible, involves a certain amount of wishful thinking. And as for the NDP, uh, climate change may have an impact there, but probably more Mr. Trudeau's uh, inability to translate promises or principles into consistent action will be the factor that drives some left of center voters from the Liberals to the NDs. So it will go in all directions.
Now, in these last days before the election, do you expect to see more trash talk, or do you think they'll just kind of sit back more and see what happens at the polls? So perhaps Liberals bringing up, issues like abortion, guns, anti-vax issues, like you mentioned before. Does fear politics like that, does that work?
Yes,
You think it works? And you think they're going to be trash talking more?
the evidence from the past 20 years suggests that unless you are hugely over the top, it will tend to work more often than not. Uh, the uh, the fact that Canadians are increasingly isolated from one another socially and psychologically, and not just because of the pandemic, I think reinforces that. You have more and more groups retreating into their social or online bubbles, so they don't actually talk to people who as much to people who don't think the way they do, and as a result, our country is increasingly fragmented, not just regionally, but in multiple warring tribes or folks who have simply tuned out the process.
That's a very good point there, Dr. Hale. Now, what are the numbers telling us about the age of voters? Who's most likely to actually vote, and which age groups tend to vote conservative or liberal?
Uh, this election has disrupted the normal partisan patterns. New Democrats typically do better among younger voters. The Conservatives were doing much better than usual during the early parts of the campaign. Their ability to sustain that is open to question right now. Older voters, it depends on the part of the country. In many parts of the country, seniors are concerned about the pandemic. They are concerned about their economic security. That tends to drive them to the Liberals. In other parts of the country, seniors are concerned about the economic impact of the government's policies, not just in the present, but down the road with unsustainable levels of debt being passed on to their kids. That would tend to push them more towards the Conservatives. So I don't know that aside from Mr. Singh's ability to connect more effectively with younger people, the generational factors will be that big an issue in this election compared with some others. Uh, the country is sufficiently fragmented that that uh, that is um, it's difficult to make general comments uh, that apply across the country. In terms of turnout, historically, older voters have turned out in greater numbers than younger voters. Uh, it remains to be seen what the effect of social media and online uh, discussion is on turnout by younger voters. Key factor will be the number of people getting mail ballots who actually return them. There are about 1.2 million mail ballots that have been distributed, far fewer than many anticipated. And older voters are more likely to take those out because of health fears around the around voting this year because of the fourth wave of the pandemic. However, turnout at advanced polls was almost five times the number of mail ballots handed out. So I think most people who were concerned about election day congestion or disorganization of the polls have taken advantage uh, of the advanced polls. I know we went out on Saturday evening. You know, you can say academic, get a life, going to vote on Saturday evening, but uh, there were very few people around, and they handled us with wonderful efficiency. I think Elections Canada's efforts to make it easier to vote that way, has contributed a lot to higher turnout at the
Yeah.
advanced polls than normal.
Right. I think you're right. I think that there are a lot more people doing those advanced polls. I know I had a family member going out to vote the other night, and it was an hour long wait at least to get to those polls. So we're definitely seeing that more for sure. So, what about the gender divide? Are females still more likely to vote Liberal, or is that changing?
That is the one area where there is still a fair bit of consistency across different polls. Uh, Mr. O'Toole has a significant advantage among men across all age groups, and Mr. Trudeau has a significant advantage, particularly among younger women, but also also other age groups. So that gender gap remains alive and well in Canadian politics.
hmm Now, will Aaron O'Toole perceive his perceived flip flops on the carbon tax and on gun laws? Will that come back to bite him, do you think? Or was it shrewd politics that will end up attracting more centrist voters?
It was a strategic gamble, and I think you can see the slowing down and reversal of conservative momentum when those inconsistencies became front and center during the discussions in the election campaign. Certainly, the Liberals have hammered on them long and hard in their television commercials, and and certainly the rise of the People's Party vote is attributable, at least in part, to some of those reversals.
hmm Now, Dr. Hale, do voters care about the massive debt Canada is in? It's a big election issue, or have Canadian voters simply zoned this out with all the huge spending on COVID across the political parties across the board? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's another example of the age gap or the generation gap in Canadian politics. Many younger families are heavily indebted themselves, so uh, they are uh, they are concerned that governments are going to maintain their living standards, and they don't have the memories of the enormous debt overhang of the 80s and 90s that led to the sizable rollbacks in government spending during the 1990s. Uh, People who remember that sort of thing, especially people who are in business or have some economic exposure to that level of debt and the interest rates that went with it, are a lot more concerned. But will they vote those issues, or are they already baked into patterns of electoral support? Frankly, there is not a single party in this election that is talking credibly about sustainable public finance. And anybody who pretends otherwise is living in a fool's paradise.
Okay, so Dr. Hale, what is your fearless prediction for election 2021?
My fearless prediction is that we will not know the precise results of the election on election night because of the number of close ridings and mail ballots. My second prediction is that some people will try to uh, take advantage of that fact to cast credibility on the outcome of the election, which I think is totally unfair to Elections Canada's efforts to maintain the integrity of the electoral process. And I think at the end of the day, we will have a Liberal minority government, although whether with more seats than before the election or fewer, is something that mercifully is in the hands of Canadian voters and not of academic pundits.
All right. Thanks so much for being with us today, Dr. Hale.
Thank you very much.